calling on another country to investigate the Bidens as he lashes out yet again, attacking his political rivals. This as another dramatic day unfolds on Capitol Hill, with a key figure at the center of the Ukraine scandal set to appear behind closed doors just days after his abrupt resignation. Plus, the president's TV lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and his reported prison contact in his effort to undermine the reason for the Mueller investigation. And an ominous sign for the president and his re-election campaign. Polls show more Americans supporting the impeachment inquiry. It's also revealing some troubling signs among voters he needs to win back the White House. But in the last 30 minutes or so, this is just breaking. President Trump leaving the White House, calling on two different foreign governments to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden.
China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens, because nobody has any doubt that they weren't crooked.
So President Trump right there essentially describing out loud the precise accusation Congress is investigating behind closed doors at this minute. It unfolds as a key player central to this impeachment inquiry. The former U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, is being deposed by House lawmakers and their staff. We have got a lot to talk about this hour, so let's go right to Washington, where we find NBC News White House correspondent Peter Alexander on the North Lawn. NBC's Jeff Bennett is on Capitol Hill. Peter, you were with the president as he left. You heard him make this ask. Give us your analysis of this and a little bit more about what he said.
Yeah, Chris, let's put this in very simple terms for people right now. President Trump is now publicly calling for foreign leaders to investigate Joe Biden amid an impeachment inquiry into whether President Trump privately urged a foreign leader to investigate Joe Biden. He was asked about Ukraine, and as we have been discussing here, he said out loud that he believes that Ukraine, what he wanted them to do and wants them to do, is to launch a, quote, major investigation into the Bidens. Then, unprompted, he raised his desire for China also to investigate Joe and Hunter Biden here, which is significant for a variety of reasons, not the least of which right now is the fact that this president, this White House, is tied up with a major negotiation with China, this trade war currently in place. And the president effectively said to the Chinese, if you're listening, that he would like from them to see them investigate the Bidens. The bottom line is that on Ukraine, the investigation was focused on whether or not the quid pro quo was that he was withholding money, military aid, to that country unless they investigated the Bidens. Here, many analysts, critics of the president, suggest that he's basically saying, hey, our negotiations could in some form be dependent on you doing what I'm requesting of you, which is to investigate the Bidens. He was asked specifically as a follow-up later in the course of that back and forth with President Trump on the South Lawn whether he has asked President Xi directly. He says that he has not to this point. But, Chris, it really was dramatic because the president had appeared in recent days. It's kind of gotten some traction, at least for this argument, as he'd tried to suggest it, that Adam Schiff was shifty, as he likes to say, even treasonous. The focus had been on House Democrats, on Adam Schiff, more than Nancy Pelosi, frankly, specifically. But in the course of the last hour here, we saw the president reignite a new firestorm by now saying publicly that he wants both Ukraine and China, those foreign governments, to investigate his leading political opponent.
We cannot emphasize that enough. And Jeff Bennett, so this changes the equation in many ways. You have a Volker behind closed doors, right?
Right.
But you can imagine what's going on as those same House Democrats learn behind closed doors about what the president just said.
You're certainly right about that, Chris, and this deposition is now entering its second hour. And I talked to people who know Kurt Volker. They're familiar with his thinking. They're familiar with the role that he had when he was the U.S. envoy to Ukraine. He was appointed, tapped by Rex Tillerson, the former Secretary of State, in 2017. And he held that position, Chris, until last Friday, when the whistleblower complaint was made public. And Volker resigned, we're told, in part because he wanted to be more free in what he could tell members of Congress. And whereas Rudy Giuliani, the president's outside attorney, has tried tried to paint Kurt Volker as an accessory to Giuliani's own pressure campaign as he tried to encourage the Ukrainian leader to dig up discredited dirt on Joe Biden. Volker, I'm told, is telling these lawmakers, telling these congressional staffers who are handling the deposition that that was not the case. Volker maintains that he had no role in the decision to hold up Ukrainian military aid, and that, in fact, he told Ukrainian leaders not to get involved in the U.S. 2020 election. And if Rudy Giuliani believes he had any direction, any guidance from the State Department, specifically from Volker himself, it was really that Volker saw him, meaning Rudy Giuliani, as a problem and was trying to table his effort, trying to end it as quickly as he could. It's also worth noting that Volker, when he was the U.S. envoy to Ukraine, he had that job on a part-time basis. It was voluntary. His full-time job is being the executive director of the McCain Institute. And I'm also told that he was an ally and protege of John McCain and is not seen as a Trump person, has no particular affinity or closeness to President Trump, and that the case he's making in this deposition right now is not beneficial to President Trump's bottom line politically. And now that it is 11:06, at 11:05, I can tell you that NBC News was given this first from the office of House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. He wrote a letter to Nancy Pelosi urging her to stop the impeachment inquiry. He says that she does not have sufficient legitimacy to bring forward articles of impeachment or to even carry out this inquiry process. And some of it I'll read for you now. It says this: unfortunately, you have given no clear indication as to how your impeachment inquiry will proceed, including whether key historical precedents or basic standards of due process will be observed. So this is the latest effort from House Republicans to call into question the ongoing impeachment inquiry, the formal impeachment inquiry that Nancy Pelosi announced last week, Chris.
All right, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, Peter, the president's comments this morning, of course, come on the heels of those two public events yesterday. He used vulgarity. He went after Democrats in the media repeatedly. He continued to make false and unproven claims. Let me play just a few clips from what we heard yesterday.
I saw Schiff trying to go 15, call him Shifty Schiff. We don't call him Shifty Schiff for nothing. He's a shifty, dishonest guy. Biden and his son are stone cold crooked, and you know it. Nancy Pelosi hands out subpoenas like, she has to approve it. She hands out subpoenas like they're cookies. You want a subpoena? Here you go, take them like they're cookies. There's an expression, he couldn't carry his blank strap. I won't say it because they'll say it was so terrible to say. Are you talking to me?
Yeah, it was just a follow-up of what I just asked you, sir.
Listen, you ready? We have the president of Finland. Ask him a question.
So, add to that, again, the president just a short time ago essentially making the Democrats' own argument about courting interference. Do White House staff that you talk to, Peter, and I know you talk to them every day, multiple times a day, do they still believe he is his own best spokesperson, or is nervousness growing?
Well, frankly, it doesn't matter, I think, if they believe he is or isn't his best spokesperson. He's clearly going to be his own spokesperson going forward, as evidenced by what we saw yesterday. It was remarkable to see a visibly angry President Trump in the Oval Office. I wasn't in there, but one of the photographers who was in the front row came out and immediately came to me and said, honestly, I've never seen him like this before. But there was another moment where we witnessed it again, as you noted, with the Finnish president later in the day. You can imagine the conversation the Finnish delegation is having today based on their experiences here at the White House. In my conversations with this White House right now, there is a real sense of frustration among those aides and those allies of President Trump that this strategy has not really been made clear. It's not exactly clear to them what they should be doing. You're not seeing many surrogates, certainly not seeing Republicans go out on the air and try to defend President Trump in this time. Kevin McCarthy was on 60 Minutes this weekend. It did not go well from him. And given the fact that Congress is in recess, they're obviously not easy to track down in the hallways. But were they to be defending him fiercely, there would be plenty of cameras available to them to speak. That's not happening right now as they continue to watch what critics really describe as an unraveling of this president. To see him that angry publicly publicly, while he continues to repeat information that is factually inaccurate, lies on a regular basis, I think was striking. And certainly the fact that he came back out on the South Lawn and sort of continued with that line, and even, I think, reignited it in an even bigger way by bringing China into this equation, will be something that people behind the closed doors, as I speak to them as soon as we finish this conversation, I'm sure we'll be talking about today as well.
Yeah, feel free to come back to us, Peter. Peter Alexander, Jeff Bennett, thanks to both of you. I want to bring in Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times, John Meacham, Pulitzer Prize-winning presidential historian, Jake Sherman, Senior Writer for Politico. All three are MSNBC political analysts. Peter Baker. So it is one thing to see what we saw yesterday. We know, and the Washington Post has kept great track of this, how often the president lies. He clearly was angry yesterday, as Peter pointed out. It is another thing altogether to do, would you agree, what he did this morning, saying publicly to China and Ukraine, start an investigation into my political rival.
Yeah, you know, for 2 years during the Russia investigation, the president's mantra was no collusion, meaning I didn't work with a foreign power to influence our domestic politics. Now he's saying basically, so what? So what if I do? You know, that he's doubling down. It's very much a defiant president you're seeing. He's defiant of the Congress. He's saying that the thing you're investigating, I don't think is such a big deal at all. In fact, I think I have not only the right to do it, I should do it. I have the obligation to pursue corruption, as he puts it. What, of course, the Congress would say is he's pursuing his political enemies, using the power of his presidency to do so. Now, there's no direct quid pro quo that he mentioned this morning, but he did happen to talk about the fact that they're about to have these trade talks with China. And in the context of the trade talks, he said, if they don't do what we want, we have great power over them. So the fact that he's calling on China now to investigate the Bidens, at the same time he's having these negotiations, which are of great consequence to the United States and its national interest, and obviously great consequence to China's national interest, further clouds that picture. So I think what you see here is a defiant president.
And John Meacham, you and Peter were 2 of 4 authors on a book on impeachment, which I went back to again yesterday. And it strikes me as I'm looking at this new statement we got from Kevin McCarthy, obviously a political statement that he's trying to put out there. We're fighting this. He says, unfortunately, you've given no indication about whether there are key historical precedents or basic standards of due process that will be observed. Help us to put what we've seen unfold over just the last 24 hours in any kind of historical context, John.
Well, we have a rolling abuse of power unfolding on our television screens. At least Nixon did it behind closed doors and taped it. Trump has disintermediated that as well. Without being in any way partisan, it seems to me the question for those, including Leader McCarthy, I haven't seen his letter, but every Republican, every person who supports the president, I think has to answer the following question. And the answer can be whatever they want it to be, but at least they have to confront it. Is American sovereignty worth the reflexive support of the president? That is, do you so want to support this man against all criticism, against all comers, that you're willing to live with a president who clearly believes that our sovereignty is the sovereignty of our elections, the integrity of our democracy, is basically for sale or rent, depending on the political needs of his own at a given moment. And I think that this is like the Ukrainian phone call, but he just did it in the driveway, right? Because it was, you laid it out very well. He talks about the trade talks, and then a few seconds, I think, later, he says, I think they should open an investigation. Is that a quid pro quo? I'm sure we're going to hear from the Trump people that it's not, that people are overreacting, they're hyperventilating. But there is a pattern here. And I just think it requires an honest confrontation of the facts. And maybe, folks, maybe that 45% or whatever it is now that opposes impeachment and tends to support the president no matter what, maybe their answer is, we don't care. We believe in this president. We don't like the alternatives. We believe socialists are coming over the wall. I mean, so maybe that's the answer. Yeah. But at least have the moment of confrontation where you have to answer that question.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. We don't need a Rosemary Woods, who you well know was the secretary for Richard Nixon, and there are questions about missing parts of tape. He came out and spoke openly and clearly on television. Jake, you're the perfect person to have to essentially answer the very important question that was just raised by John Meacham. We've talked a lot in the last couple of weeks as this has escalated, and one of the complaints of Kevin McCarthy is the swiftness at which this happens. I'm not sure who he's blaming for that. I know he wants to blame, but it is moving very swiftly. The question is this one of those points that might move some Republicans?
It's a good question. Well, first of all, I'll disagree with McCarthy that it's moving quickly. I mean, it's not moving terribly quickly. They want to move, Democrats want to move swiftly.
He says swiftness and recklessness. That is what his letter says.
Yeah, listen, Democrats certainly have political risk here, which would be not holding hearings and rushing this to the House floor for a vote. We don't see that quite yet. Doesn't mean it can't happen and it won't happen, but we don't see that quite yet. I will answer John's question by saying yes. Republicans believe that with Donald Trump in office, their only option is to lock themselves to the president, defend him, and until the proverbial death, because they believe that that's where their base is, and they might be right, and they do not believe that these are impeachable offenses on the substance. I don't know whether they believe that, but that's what they say. Now, impeachable offenses is in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, there is no definition besides high crimes and misdemeanors. So it is up to the Congress, to the House, to decide what is impeachable. And Democrats are in the process of doing that. I guess there is a sliver of a chance they do not write up impeachment articles if they don't find what they expect that they will find. But if you talk to most Democrats, they will say what Trump has said in the open, things like he has said today on his way to the helicopter, things that he said on that phone call, his admission that of all the things that he's done, those are impeachable enough without any other evidence. So I guess the answer to John's question is yes. Republicans are going to defend him. They believe that they can win back the House by defending him. The NRCC put out polling today that shows swing districts are wary of the impeachment push and believe that Democrats are too focused on impeachment. Most polls don't show that, but that's certainly what House Republicans believe, and that's the political reality we are working with on Capitol Hill.
One of the things that we heard, Peter, from Nancy Pelosi when she was reluctant to move forward with impeachment is she wanted to make sure she had the American people behind her. And there's a new USA Today poll out this morning with Ipsos that shows a plurality of Americans now support impeaching President Trump, 45 to 38%. This follows a pattern, right, that we have been seeing over the last couple of weeks, that public opinion is moving toward impeachment. How, if at all, does this affect whatever strategy the White House may have? And conversely, what does it mean for the Democrats?
Yeah, it's obviously not good news for the White House because the argument they have had up until now, long before the Ukraine thing came up, was the public didn't want an impeachment, and they had the polls to prove it. And that was no question a factor in Nancy Pelosi's reluctance to move forward. She was a member of Congress in 1998 and 1999 when the House impeached President Clinton and the Senate acquitted him, that the public wasn't for it. His approval ratings went up, not down during that, and they didn't want to, the Democrats this time didn't want to repeat what they thought was the bad experience the Republicans had in that impeachment effort. Now, the polls are moving a little bit, but they're moving in the sense that, they're moving to the basic corners where everybody is already, sitting. In other words, it's the anti-Trump people who are coming out in favor of an impeachment inquiry or even impeachment itself, but we haven't seen that move beyond that same dynamic. The 45 to 38, split is more or less where the country has been on Trump all along. In fact, there's been a larger percentage of people who disapprove of Trump's performance in office than 45%. So they haven't even yet gotten the full anti-Trump electorate part behind the impeachment effort. So it's a real risk for them. The calculation that Nancy Pelosi made earlier in the year was the House could impeach him on a party line vote, and the Senate would acquit him, and the president would then go out to the campaign trail and say, see, I was acquitted by the Senate, and use that as an effective electioneering argument. That still hasn't changed. It's very likely the Senate would acquit him even if the House does impeach him, and that would be the final verdict from Congress the president would take to the campaign trail.
John, I can't remember if this was part of what you wrote in the book. I can't remember who to assign each of these, but
if it's good, I wrote it. If it wasn't, Baker wrote it.
This is great.
Absolutely right.
This is great. So I'm reminded about the awesomeness of the responsibility that Congress has. I think we did see that yesterday a little bit at the press conference with Schiff and Pelosi, that they were very calm, they were very measured in their comments, and I think, you know, this is about a decision that would nullify the will of the voters, right? That is so enormous what they're undertaking, but also the idea that Congress has never been the most popular kids on the block, right? They're one of the least favorable institutions we have in this country. I checked. A recent Gallup poll showed 78% of the American public disapprove of the way Congress is doing its job. Does that play in this world at all into it, or is it about who has the stronger narrative here? What are you looking for to tell us where this is going?
I think what we've been talking about the last 5 or 6 minutes is absolutely relevant. Nobody knows more about this than Jake and Peter, about the political calculations, about the looking at both their own seats, the Senate composition, possibly the presidential ballot. That's all true. And impeachment is an inherently political process, unquestionably. It's not a judicial process. However, and this is coming from somebody who doesn't have to face the voters, I will say this. At some point, if you continue to raise the bar on what is impeachable, you lower the bar inexorably on the behavior that you're willing to live with. And I dislike what I sometimes think of as the punditry of hypocrisy. What if Obama did this? What if George W. Bush did this? And what they would be saying and all that. That's an easy thing to say. But in this case, it really does matter, because I think what the members of the House have to do, and I think what citizens have to do, because politicians are far more often mirrors of who we are than they are molders. What we have to decide is this a moment where a higher duty actually should take precedence over the next election, or that strongly support number you're looking at from the NRCC or the NRSC? Is this a moment? This is the kind of moment that people write books about. This is the kind of moment where if your portrait is on a wall, people point at it and say, this person did the right thing when it wasn't popular. One final point. In this climate, a 7-point margin is a pretty interesting number. And if you're looking for unanimity, if we're looking for, in this moment, a 60-40, a 70-30, an 80-20, I don't think that's going to happen. And it didn't happen in Watergate until very late in the game, until late July, early August, 26 months in. So it's a higher duty question. And the answer may be no, that we want to preserve our positions, we want to be reelected, and we don't think this rises to that level. But I promise you, if a Democrat had done what they were doing, they would be saying the opposite.
Well, no one at Kirkus or the book review asked me my opinion, but it's a fantastic book if people in this moment want to read about impeachment. Peter and John Meacham couldn't ask for two more important voices at an extraordinary, in an extraordinary moment. And Jake Sherman, you always have your finger on everything that's going on there. So I thank all of you for being with us today. And coming up, another day, another revelation about just how far Rudy Giuliani reportedly went in his efforts to dig up dirt on the president's political rivals. Plus, new warning signs for the president. Polls starting to show he could be losing ground with a key group he'll need to win the White House again. All coming as some House Democrats who won in Trump districts last year are going back home to sell impeachment to their constituents, including Congresswoman Elisa Slotkin, who attracted a much larger than expected crowd yesterday.
I did this not lightly. I did this out of judicious and thoughtful reflection, and I did it because I believe that it was the right thing to do based on my integrity and my oath of office. So I appreciate your understanding.
This hour about one of the president's men at the center of the impeachment firestorm. It reveals the lengths that the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has gone to deflect culpability away from President Trump and instead find dirt on the other side. The Washington Post reports that Giuliani in recent months has consulted several times with Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, while Manafort, of course, is serving a prison sentence. We're joined by one of the journalists who broke that story, Paul Soni, national security reporter with the Post, also Harry Litman, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General during the Clinton administration. Great to see both of you gentlemen. Paul, the way you and your co-authors lay this out, this is part of Giuliani's quest, you wrote, to rewrite the history of the 2016 election. So tell us about how Giuliani was able to reach out to Manafort. What was his goal? What did he want from him?
Yeah, so I think the key thing to remember here is that Giuliani was brought in April 2018 by the president on his personal legal team to defend the president against special counsel Robert Mueller and any either indictments or impeachment that might arise from that inquiry. And so what Giuliani was doing starting then, but increasingly later in last year, and then it sort of changed direction to focus on Biden this year, was to essentially find a way to undermine the special counsel's investigation, undermine the origins of that, and build a case that would defend the president. And one of the methods he was using to do that was actually something that Manafort's team was promoting back in 2017, which is that the real story of the 2016 election is, quote, Ukraine interference on behalf of the Democrats rather than Russian interference on behalf of Donald Trump.
And throughout this process, Giuliani, of course, has been a mainstay on Fox News. I want to play some of the information that he's trying to peddle as fact.
This is information that was given to me. I didn't go looking for Joe Biden. The Ukrainians brought me substantial evidence of Ukrainian collusion with Hillary Clinton, the DNC, George Soros' company. They put it in my lap. They came and gave me testimony.
No, your report, though, lays out how the stuff that he says, like he did there, is taking root within sort of Republicanism. A lot of Republicans are saying these same things now.
Yeah, I think what Giuliani is doing is quite clever in that he is saying things that on their face are legitimate facts. For example, there are suspicions about the nature of a black ledger that was released by Ukrainian authorities showing possible corruption by Manafort during the campaign. There are questions about, in fact, a part-time DNC employee was gathering research on Manafort and trying to, quote, ring the alarm bell about him. And in fact, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, did serve on the board of a Ukrainian gas producer. The owner of that gas company was under investigation by Ukrainian authorities at the time, and Biden was vice president. So these are all sort of discrete facts. But I think what Giuliani is essentially doing is creating a connective tissue to weave a narrative that suggests that Ukrainians were out to get Donald Trump. This was a vast conspiracy between the Democrats and Ukraine. And while those distinct facts or suspicions might be true, the connective tissue and the motive has not been proven and is not there. That is supposition and sort of spin on his part.
And so, Harry, you wrote a brand new op-ed in the Post titled "Why Attorney-Client Privilege Does Not Apply to Rudy Giuliani and Trump." And I think we should remind folks that after Giuliani got the subpoena, he tweeted, well, it was only signed by Democratic chairs and they have prejudged the case. Why do you think, as you wrote in your op-ed, that his arguments are feeble?
Well, look, in short, attorney-client privilege is in order to give advice to a client. That's not what's going on here. Even he says he's not even acting like a lawyer when he's out on these road trips trying to gather dirt and really take the smallest scintilla of irrelevant facts and weave them together. I actually think he's being too clever by half. He is a private citizen, and all these talks, he's going to have very little defense to actually producing all the information and that of his whole team with his weird foreign policy that was joined at the hip with Trump, with whom he shares a kind of instinct for the big lie and a kind of viciousness. And if he is put to if he tries to stonewall, it's going to support the Democrats' putative second count of impeachment, that they're obstructing Congress's count, and it's all going to come out eventually. So I think he's probably going to be a weak link because he's not a member of the executive branch, and Trump and he are making a strategic mistake to have given him this rogue power to conduct, you could call it foreign policy, but it's really campaign policy to try to gather dirt for the re-election.
Yeah, I noted that you didn't even call it half-baked theories. You called it quarter-baked
right.
in your op-ed.
Yeah.
We've only got 30 seconds left, but I do need to ask you if House Democrats issue the subpoenas that they've threatened to tomorrow, assuming that the White House doesn't give them what they've asked for. And then if the White House doesn't comply, what happens then?
Okay, so if they don't comply, it's the same song and dance in court, which could take, even if expedited, a few months. But the Dems have a different notion here to try to funnel that into their second count. I think probably the White House will try to make some kind, or at least look like they're making some kind of accommodation for that reason, and will give them half measures.
Harry Litman, good to see you. Paul Soni, great reporting. Thanks for coming on the program. And still ahead, we'll look at the president's firewalls of defense as he stares down a potential impeachment. Polls reveal how this inquiry could be shifting the opinion of a key group that helped put him in the White House. Plus, signs the 2020 Democratic field is starting to winnow even more, potentially. Candidates that are facing an uphill race to make the upcoming debates. President Trump is in battle mode as he charges headfirst into an impeachment fight with Democrats. Already on Twitter this morning, calling House Intel Chairman Adam Schiff a lowlife and the media deranged. But with an eye on 2020, Trump's team is relying on a whole number of firewalls that helped him get elected in the first place. Fox News opinion hosts, at the top of the list, using conservative media to reach his base. White women voters, another firewall, a critical electoral puzzle piece, and arguably his biggest talking point, the economy. Joining me now, Yamiche Alcindor, who is White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour, Elise Jordan, a former aide to the George W. Bush White House, both MSNBC political analysts. So let's start with this first firewall, something you know a little bit about, and that is conservative media, Sean Hannity and company, in particular, and Fox News. Philip Bump did a fascinating dive on this. He found that through July 25th, more than a third of every interviews that President Trump has given, he's given to Fox or some part of the Fox News Corps company. He's mentioned or retweeted Fox and its properties more than 500 times. But as I read that, as astonishing as those numbers are, you can't win preaching to the converted.
Well, if you can, one good way to lose is to lose the converted. Right now,
can you lose the converted?
His firewall is Fox. If he loses Fox, it is game over. And I wonder what would even happen to his mental state if Donald Trump lost the support of Fox News, because you look at how he's fired out these warning shots over Twitter about certain Fox hosts or coverage that he thinks isn't up to par. He really starts to destabilizes him when he doesn't have that comfort blanket of support from Fox News. And it is just astonishing to me that in 2019, Fox has changed so much from where it was. And the reporting that happened at Fox during the Bush years, they were not just a pushover lapdog for President George W. Bush. Certainly, it might have been a more friendly audience at some points, but they did real reporting and had a lot of criticism of George W. Bush when there was critical news to be had.
And those people who you mentioned the president has gone off on Fox are people who have continued to do that real reporting, right? So let's talk about the other firewall, Yamiche, for the president, white women voters. In 2016, he took 47% of that vote, Hillary Clinton 45%. This morning, Politico highlights a trend from recent polling. Here's what they write. Even more dangerous for the president and his allies is the apparent groundswell of support for impeachment among women, including self-described independents, white women with college degrees, and women in suburban communities. 5 polls conducted since last Tuesday have shown majorities of women endorsing Democratic efforts to remove Trump from office. So, look, we know that could spell trouble for a president who relied on these women in 2016. It wasn't that long ago that I, and I'm sure you, were talking to Republicans who had all these strategies going for how they were going to win those women back. Does anything like a strategy, a plausible one, exist now?
It's hard to say because obviously women, college-educated white women, were an important part of the president's winning factor. Even though people talk a lot about white working-class voters, white college-educated voters picked President Trump over Hillary Clinton in 2016. So that is a critical voting block for him. And when I talk to people, they tell me that they had issues with President Trump long before this call with Ukraine. They had issues with the fact that there was the Kavanaugh hearings. There were issues with the way that he's talked about women himself. There are his policies. So now add to that this idea that you have the face of a woman in Speaker Nancy Pelosi going after the president and saying, look, this is someone who's pressuring foreign leaders to do that. It's also important to note just a few minutes ago on the White House lawn, the president was inviting China to also investigate Joe Biden. So what you see is the president not backing down and saying, you know what, maybe I went too far. Instead, he's doubling down on that. Now, at PBS NewsHour, we've had polls with NPR and with Marist who have shown a 10% jump in people backing impeachment. So what you have is since April, after the Mueller report, people are now more interested in having President Trump impeached, and those numbers could really be bad for him if he starts really losing college-educated white voters.
It was also interesting, Elise. Politico spoke to an anonymous Republican operative who argues that when it comes to defending Trump on impeachment, here was the quote: "No one likes to look like Kevin McCarthy did on 60 Minutes." I just want to remind people of this.
President Trump replies, "I would like you to do us a favor, though."
Well, you just added another word.
No, it's
you said,
in
"I'd
the
like
transcript.
you to do a favor, though."
Yes, it's in the White House transcript.
And, you know, of course, this hour, NBC reports McCarthy. We've got the letter. McCarthy is calling on the Democrats to stop the impeachment process. Look, how much of a problem is it for the president? The American people are not stupid. These swing voters, these college-educated women are not stupid. You see somebody go on television who doesn't really have a defense. How much of a problem is that going to be for the president when even the people, first of all, we're hearing a lot of Republicans are reluctant to even answer any questions, but the ones that do don't seem to have a clear message or clear strategy.
Chris, it's impossible to have a clear message or strategy when garbled nonsense and delusion and blatant lies and a changing of stories and the twist and turn, when you're told as a surrogate to go out and this is what happened, here's your message, and then the president himself will change his message within 30 minutes of your television appearance. That's not a position that any credible person wants to be put in. And so while there might be a few lone rangers who are willing to go out and completely embarrass themselves and solidify their position in history as liars and as sycophants and tools of Donald Trump, there are plenty that know that if they can avoid, that's a better way to just wait this out in the near term.
Yamiche, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you quickly about the other firewall, which is the economy. And I looked at the Wall Street Journal this morning, and there was a headline calling this an ominous start for Wall Street to the fourth quarter at a time when indexes usually are getting their biggest gains. How ominous is that for the president?
The economy has been the thing that has been the cornerstone of the president's ability to keep people who are frustrated by his brash style of politics, that are frustrated by the Kavanaugh hearings or by the call with Ukraine or by the number of other scandals that he's faced throughout his presidency. I will also say, when I talk to evangelicals, when I talk to voters out in the country, they'll say, well, you know what, the president does have issues, but at least the economy's doing well. At least I have some more money in my pocket. If the president loses the economy, I think that's a bigger issue even than if he loses Fox News, because what you're going to see is people all over this country, critical voters for him in those swing states of Michigan, of Pennsylvania, of Wisconsin, they're going to say, well, why are we holding on to this president who is already doing a lot of damage to the Republican Party? So you're going to see the president want to talk about the economy, and that's why he's been very clear. He thinks this is all fake news when people start talking about the economy possibly going into recession, because he doesn't want any sort of crack in the fact that the economy could at some point have problems.
Yamiche Alcindor, always great to see you out there on the North Lawn. Elise, you're sticking around. And still ahead, upping the ante for the 2020 Democratic candidates. We're learning how much cash they're raking in as many of them get ready to make their last primetime pitch to voters. Plus, the latest on Bernie Sanders' health condition after his heart procedure and whether it raises a big new question in our 2020 discourse. Now to 2020 and some new signs that the November debate may winnow down the crowded field, upping the ante for those still in the running. So far, just 5 Democrats have met the tougher criteria to qualify for the debate next month: Biden, Warren, Sanders, Buttigieg, and Harris. But for this month's debate, less than 2 weeks away now, 12 candidates have qualified. It's the largest group we will see on one stage at the same time. Let's bring in Christina Greer, Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University. Back with us, Elise Jordan, MSNBC political analyst, contributor to Time Magazine, and former aide to the George W. Bush White House and State Department. So 6 candidates have not qualified for the debate this month: Michael Bennet, Steve Bullock, John Delaney, Tim Ryan. Elise, is there any path for them at all?
At this stage, I think that...
I didn't mention Marianne Williams.
Oh, Marianne, I know. She really was a breath of something on the debate stage back then. But at this stage, I think it's going to be difficult for those who haven't made the cut to make any inroads, just because fundraising quarter is finished. The other candidates really have momentum. It's actually surprising that the field is even as wide as it is.
Yeah, so
it's pretty much a 5-person field if we're being generous at this point.
Yeah, that's my next question, because 5 candidates, as we said, are in for November, Christina. 7 more have met the fundraising threshold, but only 3, Booker, Yang, and Steyer, have qualified in more than one poll. That's the second part of it, right? Fundraising and polling. Klobuchar and O'Rourke have 1 poll. You expecting more dropouts soon, or you think they're going to be holding on for dear life?
I think some people are definitely going to hold on. I mean, Booker does not want to drop out just yet. Julian Castro seems to sort of have moments where he surges and then kind of recedes, and it's not really showing in the polling. So for November, I do think we'll have more than 5 on the stage, but it's going to be difficult. And those who you mentioned who aren't making it in October, I think that, you know, their best hope is possibly a cabinet position or some sort of...
Yeah, it's so hard to get in the polls when you don't have that exposure, right? Meantime, and we're all wishing Senator Bernie Sanders well. As people probably know by now, he had some stents inserted yesterday, or I think it was yesterday. It's so hard to keep track. Yesterday. It's so hard to keep track of the days with everything that's going on. A blockage was found in one of his arteries. But we've got some new reporting. This just came in from our team that covers Bernie Sanders. Quote, "We do not know where Senator Bernie Sanders is. We do not know what state he is in. We do not know if he is in a hospital or not, or what his condition is. The campaign says no comment if he is still in the hospital, and no comment on whether there would even be an update today." From a communications perspective, what do you make of that, Elise?
From a communications perspective, it's doing Bernie Sanders no favor for his campaign staff to look like they're covering up his whereabouts and that they have something to hide. They just need to be forthright and honest. Plenty of people undergo heart procedures, have stents. He could be out on the campaign trail again in a couple of weeks. Honesty would really be the best policy, so that it doesn't get deflected and turn into a bigger conspiracy than what the truth could actually probably dispel.
I mean, I guess the question, why would they do it even? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Why not just come out and say,
right,
here's the deal. We told you what happened yesterday. Now here's where we are today.
Well, I think they know that their Democratic competitors are respectful enough not to exploit the situation, but this is clearly something that the president would exploit. I do think that hopefully Bernie Sanders is healthy enough and he'll be on the debate stage on the 15th, and I think that he'll try and pivot, and essentially we've already seen him tweet, essentially, "I'm fine, Medicare for all, exclamation point."
Are they looking at what happened to Hillary Clinton? Remember when she was at the 9/11 and she started to feel faint? She had a little bit of pneumonia, I think it was at the time, and then it became this big thing, at least on the Republican side.
But how much better would it have been for Hillary Clinton if she had just said, "Oh, I have pneumonia"? It's not good, but she would have taken the initial hit instead of having it balloon into this story about how she did not have the stamina for office, which, to see her out this week doing interviews, she certainly seems to be in great health.
I mean, when you're honest about these situations, you leave less of a chance for people to speculate whatever the worst situation is. So if he comes out and says where he is and what's going on, if it's fine, then I think that, you know, the story goes away and we can focus on his policy as far as paying for medical care and sort of something that so many families are dealing with today.
Yeah, I think one of the surprises of this campaign for a lot of people have been that the 3 frontrunners that we have always talked about, obviously, Biden, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are all at least 70, right? And there hasn't been like a whole lot of concern about that. As a matter of fact, Bernie Sanders continues to have a huge amount of support among 20-somethings, 30-somethings. But does this raise age questions? Will people maybe, whether explicitly or implicitly, start to think differently about someone who would be the oldest president ever elected?
It's a completely legitimate question to ask, just as you would ask if someone is too young for the job of president. I think all factors have to be assessed when it comes to the most challenging job in the world that requires a ton of mental and physical stamina. So I don't think it's unfair at all to assess the world as we have to assess it.
Well, and we saw this with John McCain because he was 72 when he was running against Barack Obama. He tried to balance that out with Sarah Palin, so choosing a younger running mate. You know, Barack Obama had people had concerns about him being so young. He balanced that out with an older running mate. But I do think these are fair questions. We want to know the health of any leader of the United States. We know that the current president has a sham doctor who's like, everything's perfect. So, I mean,
healthiest president in history.
Exclamation point, right? And so we want to make sure that whoever is leading this nation has the mental and physical stamina.
Christina Greer, Elise Jordan, great to have both of you here. In our next hour, my colleague Andrea Mitchell welcomes Rachel Maddow to her show to talk about the breaking news.